In the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the Wyoming Badlands, where the horizon stretched like an endless promise unkept, lived Eliza Thorne, a woman whose life had been etched into the rugged landscape as deeply as the canyons carved by ancient rivers. At 28 years old, she possessed resilience that could rival the sturdiest oak, her hands calloused from years of toil, her spirit forged in the unrelenting fires of necessity and loss. The Thorne Ranch, once a thriving beacon of frontier prosperity under her father's watchful eye, had withered like the parched grass under the merciless sun. Droughts had come in waves, debts had piled up like storm clouds, and 2 winters ago, her father had succumbed to a pneumonia that no amount of frontier medicine could conquer, leaving Eliza to inherit not just the land, but the weight of its survival. There were no brothers to share the load, no hired hands she could afford on the meager profits from selling off what cattle remained. It was just her, the whispering winds that carried dust across the plains, and a herd of stubborn longhorns that seemed to multiply her worries with every lowing call. Each day began long before the first light pierced the darkness, Eliza rising from her threadbare cot in the small cabin her grandfather had built with his own hands, the wood now weathered and creaking like old bones. Her boots would crunch against the frost-kissed earth as she stepped out into the chill of pre-dawn, the stars above still twinkling like distant hopes she dared not chase. She would light a lantern, its flickering glow casting long shadows across the yard, and begin the ritual of chores that had become her existence, feeding the horses in the corral, their breaths steaming in the cold air, then mending fences that the coyotes and relentless storms conspired to tear down night after night. The wire bit into her palms, drawing blood more often than not, but Eliza paid it no mind, wrapping rags around her hands and pressing on, for to stop was to invite ruin. By the time the sun crested the eastern ridges, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, she was already astride her faithful mare, Daisy, a sorrel with a white blaze that had been her companion since girlhood, driving the herd toward fresher pastures that grew scarcer with each passing season. The cattle moved slowly, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that clung to Eliza's clothes and hair, turning her into a ghost of the land itself. She shouted commands, her voice hoarse from disuse and the dry air, cracking her whip when necessary to keep stragglers in line, all while scanning the horizon for signs of predators or poachers who might see her isolation as an opportunity. The afternoons blurred into a haze of sweat and strain, repairing the sagging roof of the barn where leaks threatened to rot the hay stores, or hauling buckets of water from the dwindling creek that snaked through the property, its banks cracked and thirsty. The water was heavy, slashing against her sides as she trudged back and forth, her muscles aching in protest. But she ignored the burn, focusing instead on the rhythm of her steps, a mantra of endurance that kept despair at bay. Sleep was a fleeting visitor, rationed like the last drops from a canteen. She often collapsed into her cot only when her eyelids betrayed her, heavy with exhaustion, whispering to the stars peeking through the cracks in the cabin walls, "One more day, just one more," as if bargaining with the universe itself. But the land, vast and indifferent, did not yield easily to such pleas. The summer of 1887 had been particularly merciless, turning the once lush grass to brittle straw that snapped underfoot, the creek reduced to a mocking trickle that barely quenched the thirst of man or beast. Eliza pushed herself harder than ever, her frame growing gaunt under the relentless sun, her cheeks hollowed and her hazel eyes shadowed by dark circles that bloomed like bruises from sleepless nights. Neighbors in the distant town of Laramie whispered about here a stubborn Eliza Thorne, the widow who wouldn't accept help, though she had never married, her heart too bound to the ranch to entertain suitors. But pride was her unyielding armor, and vulnerability her greatest fear. A chink that could shatter everything she held dear. She bartered what little she had as the general store, trading eggs from her few chickens or hides from trapped rabbits for flour, salt, and ammunition, her eyes fierce with determination even as her body screamed for a respite. One sweltering afternoon, as thunderheads gathered on the horizon like uninvited guests portending a storm, Eliza felt the first insidious tremor of weakness creep through her limbs. She was out by the northern fence line, wrestling a stubborn post into place, the ground hard as iron from the drought, requiring her to dig deep with a shovel that blistered her hands anew. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes, and she paused only to wipe it away with the sleeve of her faded calico dress, the fabric threadbare and patched in places. The world around her seemed to shimmer in the heat, the air thick and oppressive, but she gritted her teeth and heaved again, muscles straining against the resistance. Then, without warning, a wave of dizziness crashed over her like a rogue breaker on a stormy sea, the sky tilting wildly, the post slipping from her numb grip as her knees buckled beneath her. She crumpled to the dust-choked ground, the impact jarring but distant, as if happening to someone else. Fever clawed at her insides, a fire born not just from the sun's glare but from the deep-seated exhaustion that had eroded her defenses, compounded by a chill that had seeped into her bones from too many short nights exposed to the elements. She lay there, sprawled in the dirt, the world spinning in a nauseating whirl, her breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps, too spent to cry out for help that she knew wouldn't come anyway, for who would hear in this isolated corner of the wilderness? The buzzards circled high above, their shadows crossing her vision like omens, but Eliza's mind drifted to fragmented memories, her father's laughter echoing across the fields, her mother's gentle hands teaching her to bake bread, simpler times before the land turned foe. It was in this moment of utter collapse that fate intervened in the form of a stranger, a lone rider cresting the distant ridge, his silhouette cutting sharp against the gathering storm clouds that rumbled with distant thunder. He was a cowboy, broad-shouldered and weathered by years under open skies, his Stetson pulled low over eyes the color of aged whiskey, reflecting a life of hard trails and harder choices. His name was Jack Harlan, a drifter who had wandered into these parts chasing whispers of work on the bigger spreads to the south, his past a tapestry of cattle drives from Texas to Montana, saloons filled with smoke and regret, and a family lost to a smallpox outbreak that had left him ruthless and wary of attachments. He'd seen the thin plume of smoke from Eliza's chimney the night before, curling lazily into the starlit sky as he camped nearby, and drawn by curiosity or perhaps an unspoken pull of destiny, he had veered his horse toward the ranch at first light, the animal's hooves clipping steadily over the rocky terrain. From afar, he spotted her fallen form, a small heap against the vastness, and his heart quickened with alarm, spurring his mount forward in a gallop that kicked up dust in his wake. Dismounting in a fluid motion that spoke of countless hours in the saddle, he approached cautiously, his spurs jingling softly as he knelt beside her, the scent of sage and earth mingling with the metallic tang of impending rain. "Miss, you all right there?" His voice was gravelly, laced with genuine concern honed from tending to injured trail hands, but Eliza offered no response, her skin burning hot under his tentative touch as he checked for signs of life, finding only the faint flutter of her pulse beneath her wrist, weak but persistent. A quiet curse escaped his lips under his breath, recognizing the signs of fever and overwork all too well, for the frontier claimed many in such silent ways. With a gentleness that belied his rugged frame and calloused hands, Jack slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she were a fragile wildflower caught in a gale, her weight alarmingly light against his chest, a testament to the toll the land had exacted. She stirred faintly, a murmur escaping her lips, but consciousness eluded her, lost in the delirium of heat and fatigue. Cradling her close, he carried her toward the cabin, his boots crunching over the dry grass, the first drops of rain pattering against his hat as the storm broke loose, thunder rolling like artillery in the distance. The door creaked open under the nudge of his boot, revealing the modest interior, a single room with a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table scattered with tools and a half-mended harness, and a narrow bed where he gently laid her down, the quilt rumpled from her hasty departures each dawn. The air inside was thick with the scent of earth and faint lavender from a sachet she'd sewn herself in quieter times, a small touch of femininity in an otherwise austere existence. Jack wasted no time. His movements efficient and purposeful, he built a fire in the hearth with kindling from the stack by the wall, the flames crackling to life and chasing the chill that had settled in the room, then fetched cool water from the rain barrel outside, the downpour now steady and soaking his shirt as he hurried back. Dipping a clean cloth found in a drawer with lines, he pressed it to her forehead, watching as beads of sweat mingled with the moisture, her features twisted in the grip of delirium, brows furrowed and lips parted in shallow breaths. "Easy now, miss," he murmured softly, though she couldn't hear him, his voice a low rumble that blended with a storm's fury outside. The fever raged within her like a tempest mirroring the one battering the cabin, winds howling through the cracks and rain lashing the window panes, and Jack knew from experience that it stemmed from more than the weather. Overwork had worn her body's defenses thin, inviting illness to take hold. He rummaged through her sparse pantry, shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and a tin of coffee, finding a bundle of dried herbs and a strip of willow bark she'd gathered from the creek banks for just such ailments, remedies passed down from her mother who had learned them from the native woman in the area. Brewing a tea with practiced hands, he'd tended his share of sick cowboys on long drives, boiling water over campfires and forcing bitter concoctions down reluctant throats. He coaxed sips past her parched lips, tilting her head gently to avoid choking, the liquid steaming and aromatic in the firelight. Hours blurred into an indistinct passage of time as he sat vigil by her bedside, a wooden chair creaking under his weight, changing compresses when they warmed too much and stoking the fire to keep the room steady against the dropping temperature outside, his own exhaustion kept at bay by the quiet resolve that had carried him across a dozen states and through blizzards that buried lesser men. Jack wasn't one for putting down roots. The loss of his family had left him with ghosts as constant companions, whispering of what-ifs in the quiet nights under the stars, driving him to roam from job to job, always one step ahead of the pain. But something in Eliza's fierce solitude tugged at him, a mirror to his own battles fought in isolation, reminding him of the sister he'd lost too young, her face fading in memory but her spirit echoing in women like this one, unbowed by hardship. As the night deepened, the storm raging on with flashes of lightning illuminating the room in stark bursts, the fever began to break in fits and starts, Eliza's body shuddering with chills as sweat soaked the sheets, her murmurs growing coherent at times, names of cattle, worries about the fence, fragments of a life consumed by duty. Jack wiped her brow, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary, a spark of connection igniting in the dim light, though he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. By the time the first gray light of false dawn filtered through the window, the rain had tapered to a drizzle, leaving the world outside washed clean and muddied, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth. Eliza stirred more purposefully, her eyes fluttering open to meet the stranger's gaze, illuminated by the dying embers of the fire, confusion and weariness mingling in her hazel depths. "Who are you?" she murmured, her voice hoarse and cracking like dry leaves, attempting to sit up but wincing at the ache that permeated her body. Jack offered a wry smile, lines crinkling around his eyes, handing her the mug of cool tea with steady hands. "Name's Jack Harlan, ma'am. Found you out by that fence yonder. You gave the buzzards quite a scare, collapsing like that." He paused, gauging her reaction, then added softly, "You've been running yourself ragged. Fever had you good, but it's breaking now. Drink slow, a willow bark'll help with the pain." She accepted the mug hesitantly, her fingers brushing his, a jolt of warmth in the contact that surprised them both, and sipped tentatively, the bitter taste grounding her in the reality of her vulnerability. For the first time in years, as the storm's remnants whispered against the roof, Eliza felt the crushing weight lift not just from her weary body, but from her spirit, cracked open by necessity to allow a stranger's kindness in. They talked in hushed tones as the dawn fully broke, the sun piercing the clouds to cast golden rays across the floor, Jack sharing tales of distant trails and stampedes under moonlit skies, Eliza confessing the debts that haunted her dreams like specters, the bank's letters piling up on the table, threatening foreclosure if she couldn't make the next payment. The conversation flowed like the creek after rain, tentative at first but gaining momentum, revealing shared threads of loss and perseverance. Jack didn't leave that day, offering to mend the fence she'd fallen beside while she rested, his horse tethered outside as he worked, the sound of hammer on wood a comforting rhythm. He drove the cattle to water later, their lowing a symphony of normalcy, and shared her evening meal, a simple fare of beans and cornbread made richer by his quiet company, laughter creeping in over stories of mishaps on the trail. Eliza's strength returned gradually, not just in her limbs but in the realization that some burdens were meant to be shared, that pride could bend without breaking. In the Wyoming Badlands, where survival had long been a solitary dance with death lurking in the shadows, two steps together began to change the rhythm, hinting at a future where the relentless dawn might hold promise rather than peril. As the sun set on that transformative day, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Jack sat on the porch whittling a piece of wood, Eliza beside him wrapped in a shawl, their silence companionable, the fever's grip a fading memory, but the tenderness that had tended it a spark that would grow into something enduring.